Why is feminist activism active in Latin America? Latin America can now boast rapid social change, with rising female employment, soaring representation, outpacing Europe, protections for domestic workers, and ginormous rallies against sexist violence. This sharply contrasts with entrenched patriarchy in the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia. What is different about Latin America? I would stress relatively weak constraints on women's mobility, economic development, and democratization. These deep roots and disruptors create a fertile environment for sustained mobilization. If you'd rather listen than read, I have recorded an audio version of Rocking Our Priors, available on Spotify, etc. Rising female employment, economic development, and democratization create an enabling environment. Latin America's republics reinforced men's control. Legislation curtailed women's freedom to work outside the home, open bank accounts, sign contracts, and appear in court. Divorce was illegal for much of the 20th century, given church opposition and legislators' acquiescence. Housebound with multiple children, women remained economically dependent on husbands. Men decided the laws of the land. Female employment rose in the 1970s thanks to falling fertility, education, economic insecurity, the expansion of the service sector, and rising demand for cheap, docile labor. Given shifting opportunity costs and no tradition of female seclusion, families increasingly saw female employment as advantageous. By contrast, in MENA and South Asia, female employment remains low, notwithstanding economic development. To support their families, women in squatter settlements and barrios pooled resources and strategized in neighborhood associations. Communal kitchens became political hubs in Argentina. Women questioned their subordination. At mothers' clubs, often supported by the church, women sought to collectively resolve their problems: sewage, daycare, and domestic violence. To secure better health care in Buenos Aires, women joined urban social movements. Harnessing their legitimate identities as mothers, women's organizations pushed for human rights and democratization. They protested disappearances in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Building on local organizing, Latin American feminists have forged solidarity through encuentros, national and regional activist meetings. Encuentros bring together tens of thousands of women, feminist collectives, poor people's movements, indigenous groups, neighborhood associations, rural women's organizations, and student associations. For 4 decades, feminists of different ethnicities, races, classes, and generations have shared experiences, reflected on their lives, recognized common grievances, analyzed diverse forms of oppression, and exchanged campaign strategies. Latin America's strong regional feminist network has provided hope, support, and solidarity for campaigns on quotas, domestic violence, and reproductive rights. With booming cities, Latin America is now 80% urban. This provides fertile grounds for activism. People living in interconnected, heterogeneous, densely populated areas with greater access to mass communications are perhaps more likely to hear critical discourses, see slogans of resistance emblazoned in political graffiti and murals, and learn about successful activism from their large, diverse social networks. By seeing successful resistance, others gain confidence in the possibility of reform and joining forces. Democratization is fundamental. A permissive environment for myriad struggles catalyzes a culture of resistance. Citizens realize that they can secure socio-political change through relentless mobilization. Argentinian women came out en masse in 2001. They organized factories, joined neighborhood associations, marched with baby strollers, blocked roads, banged their casseroles, pots, and pans, rallied demonstrators with megaphones, chanted protest songs, and shouted "Que se vayan todos." They all must go. Through relentless mobilization, women became accustomed to resistance, gained esteem, and built broader networks. In Bolivia's gas and water wars, women mobilized neighborhood associations. Likewise in Chile, feminists have been emboldened by parallel struggles for social justice, like student mobilization. Gender gaps in political efficacy and engagement still persist, but they are closing. These big structural shifts, economic development, female employment, and democratization, provide an enabling environment for campaigns on gender quotas, domestic workers' rights, sexist violence, and abortion. Gender quotas. 95% of legislative seats in the first post-transition elections were won by men. Over the 1990s, men continued to account for more than 90% of lower or unicameral legislatures. Autonomous women's movements decried this exclusion from political decision-making. Male legislators acquiesced to feminist pressure for quotas, but with loopholes. Feminists in civil society and public office maintained momentum. They strengthened gender quotas, closed loopholes, and raised thresholds under both left and right-wing governments. Women's legislative representation increases citizens' support for female leaders, fostering a positive feedback loop. Domestic workers' rights. Many poor Black and Indigenous girls start domestic service at a vulnerable young age. Their low wages and long solitary workdays inhibit organizing. Elites, as well as middle-class women, tend to ignore their plight. Servitude has a long history in Latin America and is still seen as natural. Cruz Oliveira started domestic work at the age of 10. She was routinely psychologically, physically, and sexually abused. Until age 21, she only received clothes and food, not pay. Like many other domestic workers, Cruz Oliveira thought her situation was unchangeable. But then she heard a radio program on domestic workers' rights. Curious to learn more, she snuck out and clandestinely gathered with activists in church. By networking with other domestic workers and expanding her horizons, Cruz Oliveira came to believe she could change her circumstances and would be supported. She became president of the National Federation of Domestic Workers in Brazil, securing progressive legal reform. With the support of institutionalized left governments, as in Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay, domestic workers' organizations have pushed for labor rights and stronger enforcement. Their lives have materially improved, with shorter workdays and broader social security. Domestic worker organizations were also strong in Peru and Mexico, but they were unable to secure support from non-left-wing presidents. Most continued to work without contracts or social security.